And we are on. All right, thank you. So we're reconvening this meeting of the Oregon Water Resources Commission. One thing I'll repeat after each of our breaks, the fact that these microphones that we're using are super sensitive and they will pick up conversation, even super quiet conversation anywhere in the room. And it will end up on the recording. So please keep that in mind as we're proceeding. So let's see, our next agenda item is approval of minutes. All the commissioners have had a chance to read through the minutes. Okay. All right, can I get a motion on these minutes? All right.
To approve the minutes from September 1st, 2022.
All right, thank you. I just have to Commissioner Kinkara is seconding the adoption of these minutes. Any further conversation? All right, let's take the roll. Commissioner Wolf?
Yes.
Commissioner Kinkara?
Yes.
Commissioner President?
Yes.
Commissioner Lee? Oh, sorry. Commissioner Mall?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Commissioner Clem?
Yes.
And Commissioner Reeves says yes, and the minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, next is Justin for the groundwater allocation project.
Hey, good day, Chair Reeves and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section here and the Oregon Water Resources Department. Please give me one moment to pull up my presentation. For the first time, I don't need to ask what you're seeing. All right, there we go. Okay, so today I'm here to provide an update in an ongoing series of updates on what we're calling our groundwater allocation project. That's the project in which we are working to develop groundwater allocation policy that we expect to culminate in rulemaking that will lead to more sustainable and protective policies for groundwater allocation going forward in the future. The most recent task in this project was that we held a series of public outreach meetings in September and October of this year. We had 5 facilitated meetings, and we wanted to seek input on reimagining the groundwater policy ahead of drafting kind of an initial set of rules that we'd like to put eventually in front of the commission. And we held 5 public outreach meetings over that time period. There were 4 hybrid meetings, Salem Bend, Central Point, and LeGrand, and then 1 that was online only. We had oh boy, now my notes have disappeared because I'm on 2 screens. I want to say we had more than 400 participants total, online and in person. We received more than 100 public comments and an additional 50 pieces of feedback through other channels that we've integrated in. So I'll be talking about those later on in the presentation. This was the agenda for our public outreach meetings. I spent about 35 minutes giving some background, little groundwater primer, little discussion of our existing allocation process and some of the issues that's led to. And most of the meeting was dominantly taken for this public input session to answer folks' questions and to gather their input. So that was really the point, and that's where we put most of the time on the agenda. And so today, I'd like to briefly recap those background concepts and spend again most of our time going through the input that we received and kind of summarize that for folks. We provided I should say our facilitator was Kearns and West Consultants. They put together pretty lengthy document that summarized all of the public comments and had in appendices the actual survey comments that we received. So all the details are in that very large document. And we provided to you, I think, the upfront summary portion of that as well in the materials. I said during all these public meetings, and I'll say again here, that what was presented was really based on a number of commission meetings and staff reports going all the way back, I'd say, to at least 2016 in my tenure. We put together a summary sheet that summarized those key meetings, or at least what we saw as the key meetings, provided direct links to the staff reports, provided links to recordings of presentations up on YouTube so folks could get to them. And I guess for anybody watching today, as well as for commissioners, I'll just say that all that background information, as well as full recordings of our public outreach meetings, are available on our website. And that's what I'm showing up here right now. Is top picture is just a picture of our homepage. Wanted to highlight the news and updates section. And that in that news and updates section, there is a link to groundwater allocation project, and that's where all this background information can be found. And going forward, that's where we're going to be posting all the new information we create as we build up to the rule adoption. So these bullets are what I want to present today in this kind of a choose your own adventure opportunity for the commission. As far as the key groundwater concepts and the allocation issues and potential solutions, these slides are dominantly things that that folks have seen before, either in commission meetings or anybody that attended any of the public meetings. My intent is to breeze through them pretty quickly in a 15-ish minute time frame. That being said, if folks have a desire for the full presentation that I would give, I'm happy to do that too. That runs about 30 minutes. So, I just want to take your temperature. Yeah.
I have seen your presentation.
All right, perfect. Yeah, good. Just making sure. So, and as I breeze through these things again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions along the way. And again, for folks that might be in the audience or online, all this is recorded, and I'll make the last pitch to go to our website, and you can get links to all those recordings there and see the full presentation. All right, so with that, just a real brief review of going through the key groundwater concepts. The point of this was to make sure that we had folks with some baseline understanding of these public outreach meetings, so that we're clear about how the groundwater system works and what we're looking to do with respect to our policy and rule adoption on how we allocate groundwater rights and how that fits into the physical system. So we talked about what is groundwater, water in pore space below our feet, talked about what groundwater is part of the hydrologic cycle, and that it's a dynamic and flowing part of the cycle. So it receives recharge, there's flow through the system, and it discharges in many cases in Oregon to support stream flow. Took a little closer look at how groundwater discharges to streams and what that might and how that supports base flow. Gave a kind of a different look, a thought experiment of looking at this picture happens to be of a stream that's flowing in August, September after several months of no rain in the valley. There's no snowpack above the stream. There's no dams. So trying to get people to put together that this is groundwater discharge, this is base flow, and that this base flow is always present in streams, but forms the largest percentage of stream flow in the summer months. And that is the time at which the earliest users in our prior appropriation system and in our treaty obligations to Indigenous folks before that, this is what they depend on, right? They depend on groundwater discharging to streams. And that when we develop groundwater, we are essentially both, especially in early time, we're starting to pump a little bit of the dynamic storage in the system. But over time, with the hydraulically connected aquifer, we are capturing flow that would otherwise discharge to streams. Tried to make that a little bit more clear. Gave a kind of semi-quantitative graph of how the source of water to wells works. Water from storage making the dominant proportion in early time, and with hydraulically connected streams, water that's captured, or what's called stream flow depletion, growing as pumping goes on, pumping time goes on, and approaching 100% at late pumping time. So again, developing groundwater, especially in hydraulically connected systems, over the long term, is essentially developing base flow, right? That groundwater was going someplace before development, and development kind of picks up water along the hydrologic cycle before that groundwater can discharge to streams. Said that in words to just again get it across in a different format. And then ended with, just summarizing, hopefully after that kind of baseline background, folks can agree or see that our allocation of groundwater over the past 65 years has contributed to reduced surface water base flow and groundwater level declines or reduction in storage in various places across the state, and that comes at the expense of our existing users, our senior users in this prior appropriation system. So from there, went on to talk about some allocation issues and potential solutions. Issues arising from our existing allocation process and some initial ideas for updating the allocation process. Pointed out this composite hydrograph in the Harney Basin, which is one of our most recent and really visible examples of a place where I talk a lot, especially in the background, about the hydraulic connection with streams, but there's some aquifers that aren't really well hydraulically connected. This is one example of a kind of a volcanic subsurface deposit that's isolated from surface water bodies and a lot of recharge. And in that case, storage does provide the dominant source of water to wells. And over time, as development increases, that storage starts to be reduced, and that's seen with falling water levels. So also talked about where we do have hydraulically connected streams, that our current rules and process are such that we protect against short-term acute impacts to surface water, while cumulative impacts and long-term impacts typically have been allowed to occur. So in my shorthand, I say, hey, we're looking at impacts within a year or an irrigation season for wells within a mile of streams. And if the impacts are from wells that are further away, which is a big determining factor in the timing of impact to stream flow, and or where impacts build over time and where multiple allocations of groundwater have cumulative impact, those have not in the past been looked at as a significant reason to deny a new application. So we want to look at those long-term impacts with this this new policy and future rulemaking. We want to make sure we look at cumulative impacts. Also, this last bullet, we've been, we've been requiring historically data to exist in order to indicate over appropriation, and we're looking at our definitions of over appropriation and how we assess the amount of data we have in our statutory criteria of having a preponderance of the evidence to determine these things. We want to make sure that our rule language is such that we can make positive determinations one way or another with respect to over appropriation, and therefore whether or not water is available for new allocation. So kind of a rehash of one of the problem statements is that due to our current laws and rules, or under our current laws and rules, or I should say rules and policy, More than 70% of groundwater applications in the past decade have resulted in a permit, and approximately 80% of those have come in these areas of concern that we identified back in June of 2001. So that's concerning and has kind of been the catalyst for taking a closer look at our allocation process. So I've iterated on this presentation over time, and I've tried the slide content is the same, but the titles have evolved over time, and I've tried to put these problem statements into the context of the source of water to wells, of storage being the source, certainly in early time for all wells, and into later time for those in non-hydraulic or poorly hydraulically connected aquifers. I've talked about the definition of reasonably stable. This is a term from the Groundwater Act of 1955 legislative policy that the department shall determine and maintain reasonably stable water levels, and how the state has only defined reasonably stable in 2 critical groundwater areas in the Umatilla Basin, and how we have defined excessively declined, or opposite of reasonably stable, but how that leaves, how that's fine in this example. This set of wells around Mount Angel meets the definition of excessively declined, and indeed we haven't been issuing in this area for quite some time, even though it's kind of outside of our administrative boundary there, the Mount Angel groundwater limited area. Or still, if we get an application in this area, we haven't been issuing because of this record of water levels. But then I went on to show some examples from the Deschutes Basin where it was less obvious, and spent some time going through these multiple hydrographs from multiple wells across the basin, and how none of these hydrographs have yet met the definition of excessively declined. And so that makes it difficult from a groundwater reviewer's viewpoint to have a definitive yay nay on saying is water available for future allocation, and therefore addressing this, what is reasonably stable is something that I consider an important aspect of this groundwater allocation process. And then I went to the capture side of the source of water to wells. Cited, this is again, this overappropriation definition is 2-part, and I've only clipped out kind of the second part here, where we talk of, or where the rules say that overappropriation says that groundwater sources is overappropriated if further allocation will result in further depletion of already overappropriated surface waters, and how over the years through policy and our Division 9 rules, we've kind of taken that definition and really constrained it down to this within a mile, within a year assessment structure, and talked about how that could be problematic, because in this case, this is a modeled stream depletion. And this isn't actually related to an allocation question, but happened to have it on hand, and it is a more specific and quantitative view of a well that's many miles from its hydraulically connected sources down gradient. So from a Division 9 standpoint, we wouldn't look at this this impact, but if we did, we'd be looking at the impact way down here in the first year of pumping, where stream depletion is about 3% of the pumping rate. However, in this modeled scenario, over 30 years, that stream depletion has risen to 85+% of the pumping rate, right? And so that's in general the case for wells and hydraulically connected aquifers, that over long periods of time, we're going to see the impact or the amount of water that comes from base flow reduction grow to approach 100% at late time. And that's an issue because we've got, as we know, we see this plot quite often. This is August water available stream flow for new appropriation. from our water availability reporting system, and most of the state is already fully appropriated in the surface water realm. And so if we are issuing groundwater rights that are hydraulically connected, we're essentially nicking away at already over appropriated surface water lines. So, something that we'd like to, I like to address. And then we also talk about regulation history as a tool that we'd like to use to get kind of our on the ground water master observations of streams taken into account in our allocation policy. So with that, again, that was kind of the first 30-ish minutes of our public presentations, and then we had conversation and comment. And so for the rest of my presentation to you today, I'd like to just go through and kind of summarize what we heard. Before I do that, any questions on the first two sections there?
Any questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so in these meetings, again, the point was feedback, and we tried to accommodate feedback in many different ways. So of course, during the public meetings, we were there to answer questions. We took, and I should have said verbal comments maybe. And also we had stations set up, this lower right photo, where folks could give us written comments if they didn't want to stand up and give their comments verbally in front of the group. So we collected written surveys at the meeting. Anybody that attended remotely in the hybrid meetings could fill out those surveys online. So that was available, and those surveys were open, I think, 2 weeks after the meeting as well. So folks could think about it for a while and give their input a little bit later. We also accepted a good deal of kind of feedback by phone and email and after meeting conversation that we tried to document and make sure that we got that into the feedback pool as well. So again, these meetings were facilitated by Kearns and West Consultants, did a great job of helping us keep on track and make sure that we got everybody's input that wanted to give input. And they also summarized the results for us that I mentioned at the beginning of our spot here. And they kind of summarized comments in a few kind of overarching groups. And so this first group, they turned hopes, you know, what do people hope happens during this process? So these bullets that I have up here are kind of representative of where we received multiple comments on a theme, right? So this is each of these bullets is more than just one person that's wanting us to, or that hopes in this case, that we have a transparent rulemaking process. So we're of course committed to that and doing our best to make sure that folks understand the process and know how and when they have a chance to provide their input. Folks hope that we would have a diverse representation of both interests and geographies across the state on the Rules Advisory Committee. We put together a number of one-page summaries. So Danielle and our growing policy group really helped us out there. And we heard positive feedback about that and desire for additional kind of short, succinct summaries of the issues and process steps. And then in the right-hand column here, folks hope that we consider public impacts, statewide interest and local conditions, vulnerable communities and various specific communities, rural communities, as well as fish, wildlife, groundwater dependent ecosystems, is that GE acronym, and in-stream rights.
What was that acronym?
Groundwater dependent ecosystems. Excuse me. Okay, in the concerns category, again, folks had concerns about our stated interest was we need to write statewide rules, and I still think that that's important. Folks recognize, rightly so, that there's local variations in how our groundwater systems work, as well as how our communities work. And I think that I heard many times that folks wanted us to take local variation and local considerations into account. And so we've been thinking about how to do that. Again, from my perspective, I think a statewide baseline rule that provides some sideboards is important. And perhaps we can think about how additional input through our basic program rules or some other pathway might allow us to take local conditions into account as well. So these next two have asterisks next to them because they aren't really going to be affected by the rules, but we heard this a lot. We heard concerns about exempt uses, right? So right now exempt uses are specified in statute, and that's not something we can change by rulemaking. That's something that will be changed by rulemaking. So so folks are concerned and thinking about exempt uses, but that will be part of this rulemaking. And also applications that are currently pending. Again, we're reviewing applications under the rule set that exists when they come in, and so this new rulemaking isn't going to affect apps that are currently pending, but folks are certainly concerned about that and you know, and we brought that up. They brought that up and we talked about it during these public meetings. On the right-hand side, we heard also folks discuss the need for legislative action, not just rulemaking. That typically came in the form of, you know, people's opinions or expressions of, hey, is prior appropriation really the right tool for water management going forward, right? That was implemented in a different era for different purposes, and values have evolved in the last 150 years or so. We heard concerns about the Deschutes mitigation program, both that it's working and please don't change it, and also that it's not working and please change it. So that's actually another, you know, the Deschutes mitigation program has its own, of course, set of rules and review timelines and what have you that run in parallel to this, but certainly we understand that our rulemaking is likely to interact with the Deschutes Basin mitigation program. We're taking that into account to make sure that we do that with intention. And lastly, folks expressed a lot of concern about the ability to use groundwater to lessen the effects of drought or drought effects on surface water, so supplemental groundwater rights, as well as the ability to use groundwater in the short term to, for example, establish crops like grapes or hazelnut trees or other things that apparently, you know, presumably once they're established, their root systems are such that they don't need to be irrigated going forward. So next category here, data and information. Heard a lot of comments about areas where we have, I've said minimal data here, less data than desirable, and what is our default decision going to be where impacts, and I put cannot be determined in quotes here. That's of course a category that's on our current groundwater technical evaluation review form under the question of is the resource over appropriated or not, and it's been a lot of conversation about what to do with cannot be determined, and our goal for the rulemaking is to set up a clear set of rules and definitions such that our hydrogeologists can feel confident with the preponderance of the evidence and our best available information, making a yes or no decision about over appropriation, which again feeds up into is water available in the statutory language and leads to a decision of is the public interest presumption met or not for an issuance decision. So we want to address that in our rulemaking. We also heard comments about gathering more water level data through our OBSWell program, considering climate change projections and how we assess water is available. And also, again, creating more data and information communication tools. We heard folks request maps for real-time groundwater level data, those types of things to help people just continue to understand the groundwater resources of the state as easily as possible. And then lastly, we got some bonus, some bonus recommendations. This was, at least for me, this was the first time that I had been out and about in the state for a couple of years, and certainly you could tell there was pent-up demand for folks in all areas of the state to reach out and talk to us. So we received several comments on on these three, in particular, but other ideas as well. Folks were really supportive of water conservation and efficiency, and we heard, hey, please support that, please fund that, please do more. Same with artificial groundwater recharge, especially in areas where we're seeing declining water levels or are have found that we're over appropriated to see if we can enhance recharge to those areas. And also a desire to see more defined mitigation programs in other areas of the state. So the Deschutes right now is, I believe, are only defined in rural groundwater mitigation programs. So there's a desire to see those types of programs in other areas of the state. So again, none of that is going to be affected by this current rulemaking process, but the current rulemaking process brings up these concerns and considerations, at least in the series of public meetings that we held. All right. We also asked just a few kind of specific questions with specific choices, and folks could select more than one response. But we asked specifically, hey, we proposed these criteria that we think that we should take into account: trends in water levels, surface water regulation history, surface water availability. How do you feel about that? Of 110 survey respondents in this case, most of them agreed with trends in groundwater levels and surface water availability. About half of them agreed that we should bring the surface water regulation history in as a criteria. And then maybe 30 folks or more had other ideas that they would put in there and specified for us. Similarly, we asked about the time frame that we should be evaluating impacts of additional groundwater allocation, especially on surface water. And again, folks could choose more than one. So there were 111 responses to this. Short term was 50 folks thought 1 to 5 years, 60 folks thought 5 to 20, and almost 80 thought 20 to 50. So people are obviously clicking more than one going up, but just the trend toward more people agreeing with longer term look at the impacts is kind of what I take from that. We had some similar kind of yes/no questions for, hey, should we consider climate change? That's certainly something that we heard before the public meeting, so wanted to again take folks' temperature. I'd say the majority said yes. We got some no's. Similarly, how do we deal with areas where we may have insufficient information? Most said, apply the precautionary principle or deny a new application or request more information from the applicant. Others said, we think you're doing fine as you are, continue on. So, I think trending toward more folks feeling that we should consider climate change and that we should apply a precautionary principle. And so that's the general summary of what we heard. Last slide I've got for you here is just talking about our future next steps. and our updated rulemaking timeline. So first of all, right now, we are starting to develop draft rules, and we're going to be taking this public input into account. So I had mentioned at previous presentations that we, or maybe Doug or I had, I can't remember, we have a relatively small team of folks from across the agency that are focusing on these rule drafting and providing input. So we've got representation from most of our divisions. I guess not our administrative services division, now that I think about it, but field services, right services, technical services, all involved there. We're going to continue our consultation and discussion with the Groundwater Advisory Committee. So I gave them a similar presentation on Tuesday. Got their feedback as well, let them know that we'd be continuing to engage with them along this process to get their feedback. We plan to appoint a Rules Advisory Committee this upcoming spring. We anticipate multiple Rules Advisory Committee meetings. Yeah. And I should also say that during these public outreach meetings, we also had a checkbox for attendees to say, hey, would you like to be involved in the RAC? So we also solicited interest in folks to sit on the RAC at those public outreach meetings. And then right now, given all of the additional rulemaking that's on our plate, that's detailed in well, there's more detail in the staff report, but we've obviously got other things going on, both with respect to groundwater as well as wells and other things in the department, and kind of sequencing all that rulemaking together. We're anticipating that we'd like to bring final rules for proposed adoption in the fall of next year, so September, October next year. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Justin. Commissioner, question, comment? Maybe, take this please.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Clemens, did you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just curious, I'm glad to see that you asked if there were people who were interested in serving on the RAC. What could you have like a number or anything on how many people?
I don't have the exact number, but I'm pretty sure we're 30 plus at this point.
30.
Justin, did you get a sense, and maybe, well, I didn't ask people about this, but I'm just curious what kind of, if you were to categorize the people who were interested in this as like existing groundwater right holders worried about their systems, people interested in new developments, people just generally interested. I mean, do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, good question, Cherries. I don't have a sense of proportions that I'd be willing to conjecture right now, but I can say anecdotally, there were certainly irrigation interests there. There were certainly domestic well users. There were folks representing environmental interests. It seemed to me that we got a pretty good cross section of the community of interests at these meetings. So I was pleased with how many different viewpoints we did.
Right. Did you want a question?
Oh, sure.
Go for it. I always stick with you.
This is, we have till 11:30, right? So we can have a discussion.
Right. Yeah, I'm
Should
sure
we
we'll
stretch?
have
Should
it.
we stretch first? First of all, a couple of things just over the top, overall, try not to be over the top. Thank you, both Justin and Doug and Raquel and others for keeping this front and center for us, because since, what was it, June, a year and a half ago, when I think maybe the first time we saw the presentation in the county sits, just were made aware of some of the issues that better data, more time, more expertise has brought to bear. You've been coming back, and the iterative development of good thinking about the data, public outreach, proposed next steps in rulemaking. I just find that really, it helps because it stays fresh. So thank you for that. And thank you for the progress that you're making despite all of the challenges, limitations. I was able to participate remotely in the Southwest meeting. And again, there too, I applaud you, both staff that were there for handling a couple of things. I was, when I first saw the meeting agenda, there's quite a bit of time up front for people just to get together and mingle. And I think that does so much in terms of building trust. So that alleviating some of that, you're trying to take something from the attitude that I think really gets in the way a lot. And I think that you all handled yourselves remarkably well in the face of at times really pointed opinions as opposed to questions. So bravo, keeping that going. I'm curious. A couple of things that I guess is really a question. A little over 400 people participated, and then a little over 125 responded. I'm assuming that of that 400, a lot of those were duplicates, that the same people attended multiple meetings, or do we have any sense of that?
So yeah, Chair Reeves and Commissioner Mull, we do have a sense of that. I haven't summarized it yet. So yes, we have the attendance lists and we just don't have them quite yet summarized, and that would have helped answer Chair Reeves' question as well. So that's certainly something we'll do.
I would propose that most of the voices are voices that we've heard from before that have pretty strong agendas, rightfully so, that they're pushing. That was a good opportunity, and we'll now get distilled down, and we'll have those same voices in the rack. I'm curious how you all felt from just a process standpoint. When I think about a big policy like this, which is policy by its very nature is on behalf of the larger public, and regardless of the policy, I don't think there's been any policy in history that didn't have some impact on some individuals, some ways that was inconvenient at best and harm at worst. And to me, when I looked at the interview questions, especially, I was struck, it kind of seemed like at times we're asking the public how to tell you to do your job. Whereas I feel like, we're learning increasingly how law, statute, rules put sideboards on sort of the empowerment staff have. And I wonder I guess it was good to see that you were able to distill out from a lot of those comments how people on those margins that are potentially going to be inconvenienced or harmed by new rulemaking, for example, or a policy that recognizes how different the water situation is now. Did you find it effective? Do you feel like from that sense we've learned things that a lot of the things that were listed you've presented before? You kind of know that's your job. You're professionals. You know these things. Were there surprises that came out on those margins, considering how some of these questions were asked?
So Chair Reeves and Commissioner Mull, I don't think there were big surprises. I mean, certainly we've heard the end member comments. I guess what I would take from the summary, what I've taken so far from the summary of comments is we're on the right track, not necessarily telling us how to do our job or not, but we presented some ideas and some directions we're headed and how do you feel about those, and the majority was supportive. So that's I would have been more concerned if the majority wasn't supportive that I need to expand my thinking. And I'm not saying I'm not going to continue to be expansive in thinking and considering, because there's a lot of details to work out, but I take from that that we're on the right track. So I'm moving forward with more confidence, and there's little details and considerations that people brought up as well that are good to have a reminder of. Oh yeah, well we should be considering this as well. So we're going to try and take those into account as well.
That's good. That's good. I mean, I hope that I think it's second nature for us to all attend to these things with, hey, wait a minute, this is going to impact me this way. And whatever we can do as a department to really create these kind of forums where people can talk about that larger picture of Oregon. And recognize that, yeah, I'm not the only one who's going to either benefit or experience inconvenience or harm, and sort of step back from the competitive, well, I'm gonna get my, I have to take care of mine. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. Oh, the TV's about, the TV's about to turn on.
Distracted by the countdown.
You get there in time.
30 seconds.
It's actually on the TV power button.
So get up to that.
We have a momentary technology break for those of you watching from a distance.
Yeah. nothing like that.
You just touch the
That's
screen.
why it's good that I'm not the IT person. So I just be punching at the screen.
Yeah. That's why I was like, if you don't want to-
Yeah, I'm just like.
Oh,
Just reboot, right, Kim?
okay.
There's only a single button on each. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you get up to that?
Have comments continue to come in? There's feedback continue to come in after those.
Yes, yeah, I think that we tried to do a pretty good job of setting up kind of an end date for the Kearns and West folks to wrap up and summarize, but certainly we continue to get emails in rack interest and those types of comments, so yes, great.
Do we have other commissioner questions or comments? I don't see any hand up, I think, huh? We have, thank you, Justin. What are you pointing to?
Saw Eric came off of.
Oh, Eric, did you have a question? Comment?
No, I didn't. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry.
We have, request for public comment on this item. So I think I'll invite those guys up here and then, I don't know whether we'll be asking to hear from you again, but thank you for this presentation. Very helpful. I did have another, I know. I think we kind of have a standing request for an update on this process at each commission meeting. But would like, it's great to have this happen, so I appreciate that. So, we have Adam Sussman and Mike Victor. Is that the right? Okay, thank you. That's impressive. Central Oregon Cities Organization. Yeah, I think, oh, sure, yeah. The mics will work more.
Chair Hughes, Commissioners, thank you. My name is Mike Bittner. I'm the Utilities Director here for the City of Bend, Oregon. I'm here today wearing my COCO hat. That's the Central Oregon Cities Organization. 8 cities in Central Oregon, representing roughly 150,000 water users in the region. I want to first just say thank you for the opportunity to be here and provide some comment in person. I think this is my first in-person commission meeting, and so I'm still a little rusty in three-dimensional interaction. Grace, I would echo a lot of Justin's comments. It was good to have staff out doing the 5-stop road show. I fully recognize it takes a lot of time and effort to put those together. You're right, Commissioner Mall. It was nice to have some time at the beginning to sort of just mingle and get to know one another. It was my first time being introduced to Justin and some of his staff and other OWRD staff. So it's just good to kind of get the rust off and get the group out there. There was a lot of good interaction. I will back it up. You heard it from all different directions. It was a diverse meeting. The Central Oregon one was. Municipal interests were there. Myself and Paul McDaniel, City of Sisters Public Works Director, attended. And again, just appreciate the candid back and forth that we're able to have on this issue. So I have a few comments I wanted to just share with this group, largely in support of the directions that you're all heading, really just to help influence and mold some of the next steps, hopefully. So one of the things I wanted to call attention to was the recent white paper that COCO commissioned. our Central Oregon City's leaders really wanted to have some additional information, some things that we could hand off to our city managers, to our councilors, to our county commissioners, really help bring some of the information that's out there, the peer review related science together in a digestible format. Something that you don't need to be an engineer or a hydrogeologist to really understand, something that we can all sort of collectively wrap our brains around in Central Oregon, something that we can share amongst our communities as well. And so we have a hard copy of that here. I think we submitted a copy of that as part of the comment at the public meeting as well. There's a lot in this paper, but there's two things I wanted to just draw attention to. One, something the Deschutes Aquifer is very thick, roughly 1,000 feet thick in places. And so when we talk about groundwater level declines and we think about things that are pretty significant, say a foot decline in a well from 1990 to date, right? Like a 32 foot decline. That's a significant decline that water managers and hydrogeologists and engineers will notice and manage. But it is a 4% decline when you look at the saturated thickness of the aquifer. And so the reason I share that context is to really just emphasize I think the practical and I think the measured response that we should approach this with versus any sort of quick, knee-jerk, broad reaction. This is a reduction, it's significant, we notice it, we're managing it, it's happening over the course of a long period of time, 30 years where we've seen expansive growth in Central Oregon. The second thing I wanted to mention from the paper is that the groundwater flow system in the Upper Deschutes Basin is not over appropriated in our opinions. When you look at the science, when you read through this paper, we think that you'll agree with that. There's over 4,000 cubic feet per second of recharge in the Central Oregon region through the Cascade Crest. 2% of that is used annually for pumping, for groundwater pumping. So when you look at the context, again, we just want you to make sure that you have, I think the most relevant and recent peer-reviewed science to develop that appropriate measured response when we update these rules. So I guess with that, we're urging the commission and the department to really think about the unique geologic framework of the Deschutes Basin and the Central Oregon region, specifically when you're updating these rules. That includes taking a closer look at the mitigation program at some point. Justin touched on this a little bit, and I really agree with a lot of his hopes and concerns slide. I like the bonus material you got there. I have not framed additional comments as bonus material, but I like that. That's a good way to do it. There were a lot of comments in the meeting I was in that led me to believe that there wasn't a thorough understanding of the mitigation program and what it is, and what its impact on groundwater level declines actually is. I heard some incorrect statements of people that are pretty distant from the program. So I think that there's some confusion generally, even in Central Oregon, about what the mitigation program is and how cities and environmental groups are using it to restore flows in the middle and lower Deschutes. Okay, so that's an area where I think we need to spend some time. It is a good program when it's up and functioning and isn't under speculation with the cap and the sunset. When it is in place, it is a good program for us, and municipalities really want to come out of this groundwater allocation policy effort with a functioning mitigation program. Let's edit it, let's iterate, let's do what we need to do. That's a really great framework for us to use moving forward. A couple of other last key points here. Let's rely on the science. We have done a ton of science in the Deschutes Basin, a ton of analysis and studies, probably more so in the Deschutes Basin than we have anywhere before. We should be able to say and determine that water is available and provide some certainty to municipal water users, to groundwater users. Okay. And finally, I know this was mentioned earlier with the RAC. I think we're one of 30. COCO would love to be a part of that Rules Advisory Committee when it does come together here later in the spring. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That was really the comments I wanted to get out here in front of the commission. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming. Questions, comments, further questions? Commissioner, I see your hand.
Thank you, Chair Reeves, and thank you for the comments. I caught the comment about the geologic framework, and that during Justin's presentation, I was thinking about a Rules Advisory Committee. The makeup should hopefully reflect some of the different geologic factors that affect groundwater in Oregon, and those differences, pretty different east side and west side, and some unique factors, I think, around Central Oregon. So I appreciate that comment, and I just want to say I support some deliberate thought about how the makeup of that group, so we hopefully adequately represent that diversity of geologic conditions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, and I really like the way you laid out these various graphs in the report. Much more detailed than the old blue whale.
we all know them well.
Yeah.
We're still using blue whale.
So Chair Reeves, do I get my own 3
You get
minutes
your
as
own-
well?
yeah.
And it's great to see everybody in person. I feel like it's kind of a little party for me. So good to see you all. So for the record, I'm Adam Sussman. I'm with GSI Water Solutions. I'm here on behalf of COCO. And I think Mike has covered most everything, but for those of you who know me, you know I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to say a couple more things. So first, I'm really glad we had the opportunity to show up and hand you this white paper, because it's a good read. And when we started building this white paper, we kind of asked a lot of questions. Who is this for? Who's our audience? And we kept saying, the Water Resources Commission should be reading this. So that was kind of our, thinking, decision makers, policy makers. And what we really wanted to do is just help you understand, water levels are declining in different places for different reasons. And I'll let the hydrogeologist talk more about that, because I'm not a hydrogeologist. But what we really wanted to do is get some experts about that have expertise in the Deschutes Basin and really lay out what is going on in the upper Deschutes Basin in the regional aquifer. And spoiler alert, those water level declines are not being driven by groundwater pumping. Groundwater pumping is contributing in some way to them, in a small way, but it's Mother Nature and some variability in our climate and precipitation that's driving those groundwater levels. That's going to make a lot more sense when you take 20 minutes and read through our paper and kind of follow that train. There will be a quiz next commission meeting. So I expect you all to study. And it really talks, Mike's already talked about the thickness of the aquifer, the recharge mechanisms. We talk a lot about the variability in the climate over time. We've seen water level declines like this in the past in the Deschutes. And so we're just urging everybody to think about the long history and to stay calm. Let's be rational about how we approach what we do here. The second thing I wanted to mention is there was a point that Ivan made at the meeting in Bend that just really stuck with me. And I wanted to just kind of express this to you. He said something along the lines of, the commission really doesn't like it when people's wells go dry. And I just kind of like what my daughter said in middle school, ditto that for COCO. Okay, we totally agree. That is a terrible, terrible situation to wake up in the morning, to do whatever, make coffee and find out you have no water. Those folks need help. Okay, this is a big problem. But what we need to understand is in the framework in the upper Deschutes Basin, in that regional aquifer, what's going on? Why are people's wells going dry in the regional aquifer? And what we understand, again, we have an aquifer that's 1,000 feet thick. But in the 70s and 80s, we had a lot of wells, potentially hundreds of wells that were drilled for domestic or other uses that went into that aquifer 30 feet into 1,000-foot thick aquifer. Why did they do that? Because it was cheaper to construct your well that way. Okay. So now over time, these wells that were drilled in the 70s and 80s, we have had water level declines in some cases of 30 feet because of changes in the climate and variable precipitation. And those wells are going dry. Okay. But the question to you, I want to leave you with this question. Are we gonna manage a 1,000-foot thick aquifer because some folks drilled their wells 30 feet into it and now they're going dry? Does that make sense in terms of the long-term management of an aquifer and that situation? So these are things that are happening in the Deschutes Basin that have rational science-based explanations. And so again, I think Justin talked about people saying, let's talk about local impact, local frameworks, local geological impacts. So we want to make sure, and we've told Justin this a lot, that in the Deschutes, we need to think about these things. And we're here to be a partner, to collaborate with the department, be on the Rules Advisory Committee. We just want to do something that makes sense. So we appreciate your time. We know you guys have a ton on your plate. We know Justin does. And we just wanted to make sure we give you some good information by which you could make your policies.
Thank you, Adam. And Mike, yes.
I'd love to respond to that. Sure. My answer is yes, we should be managing with the recognition of that, even if it's only 4%. That's somewhat tongue in cheek, but not completely. I do appreciate you guys coming. I really appreciate this. And it's one of the beauties of the Deschutes Basin is that you have such a long history of good work and investment and money. I mean, that there's no question that what you're able to do is because there's huge demand for land in the Deschutes Basin. Dramatically changing landscape in that basin. And bravo for getting ahead and keeping water in that land use discussion going. So one question or request is, I don't know if you tracked any of the discussion yesterday, but in looking ahead for the integrated water resources strategy, we discussed a fair bit. How do we bring land use into this so that it's not just, hey, there are these land use decisions and let's kick it over to the water use decision and then kick it back, but really integrate things. And I think some of the things you're doing in the basin could really help inform that. So I hope you'll bring that to the department. I'm also interested how, if you're willing to share in the year or so it's been since we discussed the cap and the feedback that you got, that, yeah, we're a little uncomfortable raising a cap and maybe we should reconsider it. What's happened after that in terms of sort of, for example, is this white paper a response to that? And okay, the other considerations besides simply the percentage available, that kind of thing, but as what we use water for shifts what the basin looks like. I'm just kind of curious if you're willing to share some of what that discussion's been like for you.
Adam, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'll take a quick shot at that, Chair Reeves and Commissioner Bold. How do I say this? This groundwater level decline issue has been a distraction from the cap and the sunset on the mitigation program. And this paper is not at all about the mitigation program. In fact, at all. It's really focused on just understanding why are the water levels declining in the Deschutes Basin. So it's not about that at all. And I do want to reiterate, as I listen to the presentation for maybe the third time now, I'm thinking for the folks in the Deschutes, thank goodness they have a mitigation program. Because remember, that mitigation program is not to mitigate groundwater levels. That's not what it's about. It's about mitigating impacts to surface water. And so thank goodness that we have that. So I think right now, what we're trying to do is, there are people that don't like the mitigation program that you may have heard about. And they're saying, well, why should we even talk about a cap and a sunset? Because we're having these, horrible groundwater level declines, and the commission is never going to allow another groundwater permit to be issued ever again. And I would disagree with that. I think we're going to come to a rational conclusion about how to allocate groundwater in the Deschutes Basin. And with that, we are going to need a functioning groundwater mitigation program. I mean, these cities are planning 10, 20, 30, 50 years out in the future. Right now, I'll let Mike explain, there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now, which is not a great way to run a utility.
Maybe that's where I chime in. I think that's where my anxiousness and nerves come in as a utility leader. As a water manager, somebody who's overseeing the financial stability of water, sewer, storm, $50 million a year operation. Right now is the time when I sit in front of my CFO and my city manager and really develop my budget for the next 2 years. Part of that process is developing a rate strategy so you can have budget in, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, however you budget. We're not having meaningful conversations about the cost of future mitigation because we don't really know if there's going to be a functioning program. So to answer your question as far as what's happened, I'd say very little, and I'd say, probably nothing, it has been a distraction in a good way. I mean, we're
Yeah.
focusing on other important issues. But if anything, we're just a year closer to the sunset, which increases the level of speculation. We do field interesting phone calls from development community, from water rights, professionals that are offering mitigation credits at astronomical prices. I won't even bore you with, they're so confusing to me. And I don't know what's more burdensome or what's more worrisome, that there's this wide speculation happening in the industry in Central Oregon, or that, somebody thinks I have that kind of money in my budget. It doesn't happen. Really, where I worry that this is headed next is really if you're a business, if you're an industry and you're looking at relocating to Central Oregon. These companies do their homework, and they understand their water issues and what they're looking at. And so if there's any sense or hint of instability or uncertainty with terms of long-term water supply portfolio, those companies move on, they go find somewhere else that has more certainty. And so that's where I feel like we're getting into sort of an economic development area with the region. And I think that's where my city management, my councilors start to get a little bit nervous in the city.
Yeah, that's why I feel like the land use nexus is so strong and the speculation around it is so strong that it behooves us to really bring it to bear and appreciate what keeping that front and center. I'm curious from a ratepayer standpoint, we on the west side, in Kennebec Basin, continue to find that ratepayers are very supportive of increased rates if it's associated with the health of the ecosystem, the health of the river system. You find that as well, or especially among your new ratepayers that, what I know from a utility board perspective, oh my God, if we raise it another $1, they're going to come screaming at us. But for the bulk of the ratepayers, it's not true. The bulk of the ratepayers are absolutely, they see what they see 50 years down the road. You find that on the east side.
I'll put my city of Bend hat on and answer that question. Yes and no. I'd say that we've experienced quite a bit of growth in Bend. A lot of the growth has come from Bay Area, west side of Oregon, Seattle, all over places that have water scarcity issues and have conservation ethic, right? So they come and they actually kind of drive us forward in that arena. So in that area, I would say yes, but I would say no in the fact that we are, reaching some key thresholds and just in terms of how we talk about water. The average cost of the bill for us is, in that $120, $130 per month range. You start to look closely at that and you know that can't just keep going up. There's going to be a spot where people just can't do that any longer. And so the overall affordability of rates is sort of keeping that at bay. So balancing both of those to produce an affordable, sustainable approach is the craft and great strategy, I guess.
Thanks again.
Yes, Julie.
I just, thank you, both of you. I just also want to acknowledge all the conservation and efficiency work that you've done in your area, in the city of Bend, city of Redmond, and the surrounding areas, because I think that is still very important, and there's a lot of opportunity for increased efficiency in just about every sector. And so all of that is on page 1. They've listed out all their efficiency. Really, I think that's something to watch. So, thank you.
As a resident of Bend, thank you very much for the work you do. And, the dispute mitigation program, I was kind of on the fringes of that, working for reclamation when that first started up. And like you said, thank goodness we've got the dispute mitigation program and the collaborative spirit that is Central Oregon. I think that's something that's kind of special in the state, that it's still, hey, you're in Central Oregon, be nice to your neighbors and let's work together because we're all in it together. And it's a nice way to be. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. COCO plans to be kind of a persistent presence during your groundwater allocation project. So I'm sure we will be
Well, good.
talking again soon.
We'll welcome that, and thank you. Let me add my thanks for this report, which I will read when I can.
Thank you.
And appreciate your work.
Can I just add, thanks to GSI also for the work you're doing on the Central Coast. Sure. The city's yachts and there's really helpful to bring science to bear on really serious water shortage issues that we have.
Thank
All right, till next time. Thank you.
Next time, thank you.
Justin, thank you. And I believe there is no other public comment and that adjourn our meeting. So I'm gonna bang. Do it. We're adjourned.
You learned how to use that.
Eric, have his hand up. Eric has his hand up.
Oh, no.
He's still there.
He's still there. Yeah.
You know, yes, there's.
Probably spirit.
Eric, Commissioner Quips would like to make a comment. You mind quieting down for a second? Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair Thor, you reached for the hammer pretty quick, but I just wanted to say, I had a comment on our agenda. I like having the commissioner comments on the second day. When we have it at the start of the meeting, you know, we can reflect on something we may have thought about or things we've thought about since the last meeting. But if we have it on the second day, we can also comment on or reflect on what we've heard in staff reports and public comment. So I kind of like moving it back and would recommend we do that in the future. Also, I was curious if people attending by Zoom can by Zoom essentially sign in to give public comment during the meeting. Kind of a mechanical question. I'm not sure of it, but it just occurred to me that might be convenient for some people. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I think we asked people to sign up ahead, but if somebody, you know, if the thought develops during the course of the meeting, then people can communicate with Nirvana, I think is how we do it.
There is a, Chair Reeves, there is a instructions in the agenda with how to submit or to register for oral public comment. We have a place on our website to do that. There's also instructions on how to submit written public comment. And people can text me during the meeting. We can, it says in the agenda something to the effect of, we can accept this request, however, we may not be able to, it might not be feasible to, with it, depending on timing.
Right.
So that's in the agenda. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric, and I'm sorry I adjourned before you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Great to see everybody.
And you too. You like that again? All right, I'm gonna re-adjourn this meeting. Okay.
Off day.
I know.
So Doug, did you find out which day you will be speaking at the legislature?
Got a better idea of what can we do.
The legislative days, I believe our opportunity is the integrated water resource strategy update on December 7th.
Devin.
And I don't know that groundwater allocation is going to be actually